I never thought a single set of keys could silence my brother's laughter so completely, but there I was, watching his smug expression crumble as the reality of what I'd accomplished hit him like a freight train. My name is Victoria Hayes, and for the past 8 years, I've served as a captain in the United States Air Force, specializing in intelligence operations. Most people don't know what that really means, and honestly, I prefer it that way. What they see is a woman in her early 30s who drives a modest Honda Civic and lives in what my brother Jake calls a shoebox with delusions of grandeur. That particular Sunday afternoon in Denver started like so many others, with Jake's condescending commentary about my life choices. He'd driven up from his sprawling suburban home in Highlands Ranch, his BMW gleaming in the parking lot of my downtown apartment complex, like a beacon of his perceived superiority. "Seriously, Vic," he said, gesturing dismissively at my one-bedroom apartment as I poured him coffee. "When are you going to grow up and get a real place? I mean, look at this kitchen. I've seen airplane bathrooms with more space." I kept my expression neutral, a skill I'd perfected during countless briefings where showing emotion could mean the difference between mission success and catastrophic failure. Jake had always been like this, ever since we were kids. 2 years older, he'd appointed himself the family success story when he landed his job in pharmaceutical sales, complete with the company car, expense account, and inflated sense of self-importance. "It suits my needs," I replied simply, watching him examine my modest furniture with the kind of disdain usually reserved for week-old leftovers. "Come on, you're 32 years old. Don't you want something more than this?" He swept his arm around the living room, which admittedly wasn't much to look at. Standard apartment-grade carpet, basic furniture from IKEA, walls decorated with a few military commendations that he'd never bothered to read. "I mean, what do you even do with your money? Military pay isn't great, but it's not like you're supporting anyone." What Jake didn't understand, what he'd never understood, was that my definition of success had nothing to do with square footage or luxury vehicles. While he was closing deals on blood pressure medications, I was analyzing satellite imagery that helped prevent international incidents. While he worried about quarterly sales targets, I carried security clearances that most people couldn't even pronounce. But explaining that to Jake was like trying to describe color to someone who'd been blind since birth. He saw my apartment, my car, my simple lifestyle, and assumed I was failing at life. He never saw the discipline, the sacrifice, or the quiet pride that came with serving something bigger than myself. "You know what your problem is, Vic?" he continued, settling back into my second-hand couch with the air of someone about to deliver profound wisdom. "You're too comfortable with mediocrity. You've got no ambition, no drive to better yourself. This apartment is proof of that." I set down my coffee cup and reached into my jacket pocket, my fingers closing around the small leather key fob I'd been carrying for the past 6 months. The weight of it had become familiar, comforting even, like a secret that only I knew. The irony wasn't lost on me. Jake sat there in his designer polo shirt and expensive watch, lecturing me about ambition while having no idea what real ambition looked like. He'd never had to earn respect in a room full of colonels who questioned whether a woman belonged in intelligence. He'd never spent 18 months deployed in classified locations, working 20-hour days to ensure American assets remained safe. He'd never made decisions that affected national security while surviving on 3 hours of sleep and military coffee that could strip paint. But Jake's world was simple. Success meant visible wealth, and since he couldn't see mine, it didn't exist. "Remember when Dad used to say we'd both make something of ourselves?" he continued, completely oblivious to the storm brewing behind my calm exterior. "Well, I kept my end of the bargain. House in Highlands Ranch, pool, 3-car garage. Jennifer's got her Mercedes for the country club. We're living the American dream, Vic. Meanwhile, you're here playing soldier and living like a college student." Playing soldier. The words hit me like a slap, but I'd learned long ago not to react to provocation. In my line of work, emotional responses could compromise operations and endanger lives. Still, something inside me shifted as I watched my brother survey my apartment with the same expression he might use when examining a particularly disappointing restaurant meal. What Jake couldn't see from his perch on my IKEA couch was the discipline that went into every aspect of my life. The apartment wasn't small because I couldn't afford better. It was small because I was rarely here. When I wasn't deployed, I was at Peterson Space Force Base, often working 16-hour days analyzing intelligence reports that kept him and his precious suburban paradise safe. The Honda Civic wasn't a compromise. It was practical, reliable, and unremarkable, exactly what someone in my position needed. But there was something else Jake couldn't see, something that had been quietly developing over the past 2 years while he was busy judging my lifestyle choices, something that would fundamentally change his understanding of who his little sister really was. You know what I think? Jake stood up, pacing around my small living room like a prosecutor delivering closing arguments. I think you're scared. Scared to take risks. Scared to invest in yourself. Scared to admit that maybe the military thing isn't working out. There's no shame in admitting you made a mistake, Vic. You could get out, get a real job, maybe meet someone who could take care of you properly, take care of me properly, as if I hadn't been taking care of myself, and by extension, him and every other American citizen, for nearly a decade, as if the woman who'd earned a Bronze Star for her actions during a classified operation in Eastern Europe needed someone to take care of her. I stood up slowly, my hand still resting on the key fob in my pocket. The moment had come, though not in the way I'd originally planned. I'd intended to tell my family about my investment during Thanksgiving dinner, surrounded by everyone at once. But Jake's condescension had accelerated my timeline. You're right about one thing, I said quietly, pulling the keys from my pocket. I have been taking risks. Big ones. Jake's eyes fixed on the keys in my hand, his expression shifting from smug superiority to puzzled curiosity. They weren't ordinary house keys. The leather fob was embossed with elegant gold lettering that caught the afternoon light streaming through my apartment window. What are those supposed to be? He asked, though something in his tone suggested he was already beginning to suspect this wasn't going to be another one of my modest revelations. I held the keys up, letting him see the inscription clearly. Grand Summit Hotel and Resort, Owner's Suite. The weight of them felt different now, heavier somehow, as if they carried not just the physical access to my property, but the power to reshape everything Jake thought he knew about me. Remember when you asked what I do with my money? I said, my voice maintaining that same calm tone I use during intelligence briefings. While you were buying your BMW and financing your lifestyle, I was making different choices. Jake's face went through a series of micro-expressions that I'd been trained to read and analyze. Confusion, disbelief, the first flicker of something that might have been concern. He reached for the keys, but I pulled them back slightly. 2 years ago, when the Grand Summit Hotel went into foreclosure, I saw an opportunity, I continued. The previous owners had leveraged themselves into bankruptcy, trying to compete with the big chains. They were asking $3.2 million, but the property was worth at least double that. The location alone, prime downtown Denver, walking distance to the convention center, mountain views from the top floors, made it a steal. Wait, you're saying you bought a hotel? Jake's voice cracked slightly on the last word, like a teenager going through puberty. I'm saying I didn't just buy it. I renovated it, rebranded it, and turned it into one of the most profitable boutique properties in the city. I walked to my laptop, which sat on the small dining table Jake had mocked earlier. A few keystrokes brought up the Grand Summit's website, complete with glowing reviews, and a booking calendar that showed solid reservations extending months into the future. Jake moved closer, his earlier swagger completely evaporated. The website displayed professional photos of elegant guest rooms, a rooftop restaurant with panoramic mountain views, and a lobby that looked like something out of Architectural Digest. The nightly rates started at $400. This has to be some kind of joke, he whispered, but his voice lacked conviction. The evidence was right there in front of him, undeniable and thoroughly documented. The military taught me about logistics, strategic planning, and risk assessment, I explained, closing the laptop. It also taught me about leadership and managing teams under pressure. Turns out, those skills translate remarkably well to hotel management. I watched Jake process this information, saw the exact moment when his worldview began to crumble. The sister he'd been patronizing for years, the woman he'd assumed was failing at life, had quietly built something he could never have imagined. While he was making sales calls and worrying about monthly car payments, I'd been running a multi-million-dollar business. But your apartment, he stammered, gesturing weakly at the modest surroundings. Your car, my cover, I finished for him. Old habits from intelligence work. Never let anyone know what you're really capable of until you're ready to show them. The silence that followed was deafening. Jake stared at me like I'd just announced I was actually an alien from Mars. his mouth opening and closing without producing any sound. I could practically see the gears grinding in his head as he tried to reconcile the sister he thought he knew with the reality standing before him. "You're lying," he finally managed, though his voice carried no conviction. "There's no way you could afford something like that on military pay. This is some kind of elaborate prank, isn't it?" I pulled out my phone and dialed a number I knew by heart. "Marcus, it's Victoria. I need you to prepare the penthouse suite for a family tour this afternoon." "Yes, the owner's suite. Thank you." Jake's face went pale as he listened to my conversation with my hotel manager. The casual authority in my voice, the way I spoke about my penthouse suite, it was becoming impossible for him to maintain his denial. "I don't understand," he said, sinking back onto my couch. "If you own a hotel worth millions, why are you living here? Why drive that beat-up Honda? Why let me think you were struggling, failing, playing soldier?" I sat across from him, noting how his earlier confidence had completely evaporated. "Because I learned something in the military that your pharmaceutical sales job never taught you. The importance of operational security. The moment people know what you have, everything changes. They start seeing dollar signs instead of the person you actually are." Jake ran his hands through his hair, a gesture I remembered from childhood whenever he was overwhelmed. "But family is different. I'm your brother. You could have told me." "Could I have?" I leaned forward, my voice gentle but pointed. "Jake, you've spent the last 8 years treating me like a charity case. Every family gathering, every phone call, every visit like today, you've made it clear that you see me as the sister who never quite figured life out. Would knowing about my financial success have changed that? Or would you have just found new ways to diminish what I'd accomplished?" The question hung in the air between us, and I watched Jake struggle with an uncomfortable truth. He'd never celebrated my military achievements, never asked about my deployments or commendations. Success in his world was measured exclusively in visible wealth and social status. "This is insane," he muttered, pulling out his own phone. "I'm calling Mom. She needs to know about this." "Actually, she already knows," I said quietly. "So does Dad. They've known for 6 months." Jake's thumb froze over his phone screen. "What?" "I told them when I bought out my business partner and became sole owner. They were sworn to secrecy until I was ready to tell you." I paused, letting that sink in. "They wanted to tell you sooner, but I asked them to wait. I wanted to see how long you'd keep treating me like a failure before I revealed the truth." The betrayal in Jake's eyes was immediate and raw. Not only had his little sister been secretly successful, but his parents had been in on it. The family dynamics he thought he understood had been completely upended, and he was the last to know. So this was all some kind of test? His voice rose, anger finally breaking through the shock. "You've been playing games with me?" "No, Jake. I've been protecting myself from exactly this reaction." "You've been protecting yourself?" Jake's voice cracked with indignation as he shot up from the couch. "From what? From your own brother being proud of you? From your family celebrating your success?" I remained seated, watching him pace the small space like a caged animal. This was the reaction I'd anticipated, the reason I'd kept my success hidden for so long. Jake wasn't angry about being deceived. He was angry about being wrong, about having his carefully constructed hierarchy of family achievement completely demolished. "You want to know what I was protecting myself from?" I stood slowly, my military bearing evident in the deliberate way I moved. "I was protecting myself from watching you minimize my accomplishments the same way you've minimized everything else I've ever done. From hearing you explain how I got lucky, or how the military connections made it easy, or how it doesn't really count because I didn't do it the traditional way." Jake stopped pacing, his face flushed with a mixture of embarrassment and fury. "That's not fair. I would never—" "Wouldn't you?" I interrupted, my voice cutting through his protest. "Jake, you just spent 20 minutes telling me I'm afraid to take risks while I've been running a multi-million-dollar business for 2 years. You called my military service playing soldier, while I was using the skills I learned in intelligence operations to completely renovate and rebrand a failing property. You suggested I needed someone to take care of me, while I've been employing 37 people and contributing more to the local economy than your pharmaceutical sales ever will." Each word landed like a precision strike, and I watched Jake's defensive anger begin to crumble into something more vulnerable. The brother who'd walked into my apartment with such confidence was disappearing, replaced by someone who was finally beginning to understand the depth of his own prejudices. "I didn't know," he said weakly, but we both recognized how hollow that excuse sounded. You didn't know because you never asked. You never asked what my deployments were really like, what my job actually entailed, what my goals were, or what I was working toward. You saw the surface, the small apartment, the modest car, and you assumed that was the whole story. I moved to the window, looking out at the Denver skyline where my hotel rose 32 floors into the Colorado sky. From this distance, it was just another building, but I knew every room, every system, every challenge that had gone into making it profitable. The Grand Summit isn't just a business investment, Jake. It's proof that everything the military taught me about leadership, strategic planning, and execution under pressure translates into the civilian world. While you were worried about my lack of ambition, I was negotiating with contractors, managing renovation budgets, and building relationships with travel agencies across the country. Jake followed my gaze toward the downtown skyline, and I could see him trying to spot my property among the other buildings. The reality was finally sinking in. His little sister hadn't just succeeded. She'd succeeded spectacularly while he was busy feeling sorry for her. "Show me," he said quietly, his earlier bravado completely gone. "I need to see it." I turned from the window, keys still in my hand, and for the first time since he'd arrived, I saw something in Jake's eyes that I'd been waiting 8 years to see: respect. The drive to the Grand Summit was the longest 15 minutes of silence I'd ever experienced with Jake. He sat in the passenger seat of my Honda Civic, staring out the window as downtown Denver grew larger around us, his earlier smugness replaced by something I couldn't quite read. When we pulled into the valet area of the Grand Summit, I watched his eyes widen as he took in the elegant facade, the uniformed staff, the steady stream of well-dressed guests moving through the entrance. "Good afternoon, Ms. Hayes," the valet said as I handed him my keys. "Will you be staying long today?" "Just showing my brother around, Carlos." "Thank you." Jake's head snapped toward me as the valet addressed me by name, as if hearing someone else acknowledge my ownership made it more real somehow. We walked through the lobby, and I felt a familiar surge of pride at what my team and I had accomplished. The marble floors gleamed under crystal chandeliers, fresh flowers adorned every surface, and the gentle murmur of satisfied guests filled the air. "Ms. Hayes, welcome back," Marcus, my general manager, approached with his usual professional warmth. "The penthouse is ready for your tour. Shall I have housekeeping prepare anything special?" "No, thank you, Marcus. We won't be long." I turned to Jake, who was staring at the interaction with the expression of someone watching a magic trick he couldn't figure out. "Jake, this is Marcus Chen, my general manager. Marcus, my brother Jake." Marcus extended his hand with genuine warmth, but I could see Jake struggling to process the dynamic. Here was a man in an expensive suit, clearly educated and professional, treating his little sister with the deference reserved for someone in charge. The elevator ride to the 32nd floor was another exercise in uncomfortable silence. Jake kept glancing at me as if seeing me for the first time, and I found myself wondering if this revelation would ultimately bring us closer together or drive us further apart. When the elevator doors opened directly into the penthouse suite, Jake's sharp intake of breath was audible. Floor-to-ceiling windows offered panoramic views of the Rocky Mountains, while the interior featured custom furnishings and artwork I'd personally selected. The space was elegant without being ostentatious, comfortable enough to live in but impressive enough to host business meetings with investors or city officials. "This is where you actually live, isn't it?" Jake asked, walking slowly toward the windows. "The apartment, that's just what I want people to see," I confirmed. "Including family members who might not understand that success doesn't always look the way they expect it to." Jake turned from the window, and for the first time in years, I saw my big brother's facade completely stripped away. The pharmaceutical salesman with his BMW and suburban house was gone, replaced by someone who was finally grappling with the reality that his little sister had not only succeeded beyond his wildest imagination, but had done it while he was busy patronizing her. "I've been such an ass," he said quietly, his voice thick with emotion I hadn't heard from him since we were children. "Vic, I'm so sorry. I thought I was being helpful, encouraging you to want more. But I was just being Jake," I finished, not unkindly. "The question is, what happens now?" Jake stood there in the middle of my penthouse, looking smaller somehow despite being surrounded by 32 floors of success that belonged to me. The weight of his years of condescension seemed to have finally caught up with him, and I watched as he struggled with emotions he'd probably never had to confront before. What happens now? He repeated my question, his voice barely above a whisper. I don't even know how to process this, Vic. I've spent years thinking I was the successful one, the one who had it all figured out. And all this time you were... He gestured helplessly at the panoramic view, the custom furnishings, the undeniable evidence of achievement that surrounded us. I walked to the bar area and poured 2 glasses of water, needing a moment to collect my own thoughts. This confrontation had been inevitable, but I hadn't anticipated how vulnerable Jake would look when his worldview finally crumbled. The brother who'd walked into my apartment with such confidence was gone, replaced by someone who was finally seeing me clearly for the first time in years. You want to know what happens now? I handed him the glass, noting how his hands were actually trembling slightly. Now you have to decide whether you can accept that your little sister isn't the failure you thought she was. Whether you can handle the fact that while you were busy judging my choices, I was building something that makes your pharmaceutical sales look like a lemonade stand. The harshness of my words made Jake flinch, but I wasn't done. Years of accumulated frustration were finally finding their voice, and I realized I'd been holding back more anger than I'd admitted even to myself. Do you have any idea what it's like to serve your country? To make sacrifices you can't even talk about because they're classified, only to come home and have your own brother treat you like a charity case? My voice remained controlled, but Jake could hear the steel underneath. Do you know what it's like to negotiate million-dollar deals while your family assumes you're barely scraping by? Jake set down his glass and moved toward me, his usual swagger completely absent. Vic, please. I know I screwed up, but I never meant to. You never meant to what? Diminish everything I've accomplished? Make me feel like I had to hide my success from my own family? Suggest that I needed someone to take care of me while I was literally taking care of myself better than you ever have? The silence that followed was deafening. Through the floor-to-ceiling windows, Denver stretched out below us, and I could see the late afternoon sun casting long shadows across the city I'd learned to navigate both as a military officer and as a successful businesswoman. The view from up here was different from my modest apartment, but then again, everything about my life was different from what Jake had assumed. I don't know how to fix this, Jake said finally, his voice cracking with an emotion I hadn't heard from him since we were children dealing with our parents' divorce. I don't know how to take back years of being wrong about everything. I looked at my brother, really looked at him, and saw something I hadn't seen in decades. Humility, genuine remorse, the beginning of respect that might actually be real this time. Maybe, I said quietly, you start by listening. Jake nodded slowly, and for the first time in our adult lives, I saw him truly prepared to hear what I had to say. He sat down on the custom leather sofa, his expensive clothes looking somehow out of place against the backdrop of my actual success, and waited. The Grand Summit employs 37 people, I began, settling into the chair across from him. Marcus has been with me since month 3 of renovations. Sarah in accounting is a single mother putting her daughter through college. David, our head of maintenance, is a veteran like me who struggled to find work after his deployment. Every decision I make affects their lives, their families, their futures. Jake listened without interrupting, something that would have been impossible just hours earlier. When I bought this place, it was hemorrhaging money and on the verge of closing permanently. Those jobs would have disappeared. The city would have lost tax revenue. The neighborhood would have had another empty building bringing down property values. I stood and walked to the window, looking down at the bustling street below. But you saw my small apartment and my old car and assumed I was wasting my potential. I see that now, Jake said quietly. I see how wrong I was about everything. I turned back to him, studying his face for any sign of the condescension that had defined our relationship for so many years. What I found instead was genuine remorse, and something that might have been admiration. The military taught me that real strength isn't about showing off what you have. It's about accomplishing the mission regardless of what anyone thinks you're capable of. I've been on operations where success depended on being underestimated, where looking ordinary was the difference between life and death. I paused, letting him absorb that. I guess I brought those habits home with me. Jake ran his hands through his hair, a gesture I remembered from childhood whenever he was overwhelmed. Mom and Dad must think I'm such an idiot. All this time, they knew what you'd accomplished, and I was there at every family dinner talking about my sales numbers like they mattered. They don't think you're an idiot, Jake. They think you're their son who loves his sister but doesn't always know how to show it. I sat back down, feeling some of the tension leave my shoulders. The question is, can you handle having a little sister who owns a hotel while you're making car payments? For the first time since we'd arrived at the Grand Summit, Jake smiled. Not his usual smug grin, but something genuine and self-deprecating. Honestly, my ego is pretty bruised right now, but I'm also incredibly proud of you, even if I'm about 8 years late saying it. I felt something shift between us, like a door that had been locked for years finally opening. I didn't tell you about this to hurt you, Jake. I told you because I was tired of hiding who I really am from my own family. I'm glad you did, he said, standing and looking around the penthouse one more time. And I promise you, Vic, I'll never make assumptions about your life again. From now on, I'll ask before I judge. As we rode the elevator back down to the lobby, I realized that sometimes the most important victories aren't the ones that make headlines or generate profit margins. Sometimes they're as simple as finally being seen clearly by the people who matter most. Did you feel that? That sting of being underestimated by your own family? Victoria built an empire while her brother treated her like a failure. How many times have you felt exactly like that? Look, almost nobody subscribes to this channel, but if you felt your chest tighten listening to this story, if you also have potential that nobody sees, hit that subscribe button. It's the only help I need from you, and it's free. But it means you believe you deserve to be recognized for what you're really worth too. Subscribe. You could be the next Victoria.